You know, in thinking about talking to you all today about May the 13th, 1985, there were different feelings that came up. Going to see some guys we haven't seen in a while, and that's going to be great, but we're going to be talking about one of the most awful days in the history of any city. And anybody who was involved that day, and I hope that's the feeling you're going to be able to get today, anybody who was involved down there will remember it from their aspect of where they were, but it'll all come down to the fact that it was just a horrendous day in the city of Philadelphia. And I'm going to ask all you guys to come on up now. We'll just do this as informally as possible. Some of these guys you'll recognize, some of these guys you've heard of, but they were all the reasons why Channel 10 was singled out for some wonderful coverage. And the coverage was because of these people and others like them. It was suggested that you guys introduce yourselves. Briefly, Harvey, and just tell everybody what you were doing that day, your title and your function that day, and then we can get into why Channel 10 was singled out. We did get some things that other stations didn't get, and it's because of these people. Frank, take it.
My name is Frank Goldstein. I'm retired from NBC 10, but really retired from CBS 10. The event that we're talking about took place, as I'm sure most of you know, during the CBS venture. I was a news photographer and editor, and I spent most of the night and much of the morning of Tuesday, 513 and 514, at Osage Avenue, mostly during the fire.
And extensively beforehand, before the event happened,
Yes,
extensively
Harvey,
with Harvey.
Yeah, I'm sure Harvey might honor me by mentioning that we spent many, many weeks and days on Osage Avenue expecting something and becoming acquainted with the wonderful people on that street.
I'm Harvey Clark. I have retired and been retired for quite some time, living right outside of San Juan, Puerto Rico. On the morning of May of 1985, I was on the corner of 62nd and Pine Street, waiting for what I'd been tipped off to be a police eradication of move. By 6 o'clock, when the shooting started, that's where I was, and spent the next 24, 30 hours. And from 6 a.m. in the morning until noon, happened to be there with Steve Levy. So it was the beginning of something that I'm sure sticks in the minds of everyone here and all of you as being one of the worst, if not the worst day in Philadelphia history.
My name is Pete Kane. I am a technician at NBC 10, and I spend Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. until 1 p.m. Monday out on Osage with Harvey, Frank, and a lot of other people that are here. And I was hiding in a house from 8:30 Sunday night to 8:30 Monday night, 3 hours after they dropped the bomb. And it's just been a nightmare ever since for me, and I'm sure everyone else that have been involved.
Hello, my name is Mike Archer. I was the executive producer at Channel 10 at the time of move, and I spent a good part of Sunday at the station as we prepared for an event, and we weren't quite sure exactly what it was going to be the following day, Monday. And then on Monday morning, probably from 6 o'clock in the morning when we went on the air, when Steve was in the anchor chair, I was in the control room pretty much nonstop with the exception of a couple of hours until probably midnight Monday, and spending my time directing people in the field and talking into the ear of Harvey Clark and others.
Hi, I'm Bill Baldini. I've been retired for about 9 years now, and I think I was everywhere. I think I was in the studio. I think I was out there. It's still a big blur for me. It was one of those days where I was thinking, is this really happening? And what is really going on? I couldn't get it all together for a while. But, you know, hindsight makes a lot of things more clear, and I hope we can talk about some of the events that led up to MOVE today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Kranz. At the time, I was an associate producer at Channel 10, which meant my main job was to help get the 5 o'clock news on the air every night. Did a lot of writing, producing, sitting with editors and cutting tape. But I had some experience as a field producer traveling to get stories, remotes on the air. And so that was my function on May 13th, the day before, which happened to be Mother's Day. My good friend Mike Archer, as he did several times before, would call me and essentially ruin my day by telling me that I had to go to work. After a conversation, we decided that I wouldn't go Mother's Day, that I would actually go down at 3 in the morning on May 13th and be with Harvey and Dennis and Charles Thomas, Pete and 2 other photographers, because we all had heard that everything was going to happen at 6 o'clock in the morning. So then that began basically 2 straight days of being out wherever the live shots happened to be, with I think about 6 hours of sleep. And then the next day my phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was him again telling me to get up. Those were his exact words, get up. The field producer, in that particular case, my job was to basically be another set of eyes and ears for Harvey, for the photographers, because the reporter is looking at the camera, everything's going on behind him. So my job was kind of look behind him and make sure nobody was coming at him. And I think that was a service for Harvey and the other reporters, because if they looked at me and saw that I was crapping my pants, they knew that it was time for them to. Fortunately, that never happened. Harvey kept it together big time, and it was really a privilege to be out there with him and the whole group. I wrote a book about it 30 years ago. I couldn't get it printed 30 years ago, so I published it myself this year.
All right, let's thank you, guys. Let's start with something that Tom just said. We knew it was going to start at about 6 a.m. So why did we know? How did we know? Why were we all in place? Harvey, maybe because you spent so much time.
I'll step back a year before, because Frank and I got word that it was going to go down in 1984. And we ran in May of 1984 to Osage and actually set up a camera on the same lady's porch that eventually Pete would spend, you know, some frightening moments of his life viewing and filming what nobody else had done. That same lady allowed us into her house a year later, and I gave her $400 for the key to her house, and $200 on the spot with the promise of $200 later. And
Harvey, you still owe me those too.
But I tell you a light story that went along with that. When Pete went up there later, when we went back to settle up with this lady and thank her for letting us use her house, she said something about how is pork chop Pete. So I didn't know what that was all about. But she said to me, she said, you know, when I gave you the key to my house, she said, I told Pete and those guys when they came that I just cooked up a bunch of pork chops. And when I had to get out of the house, I told them there's a bunch of pork chops in the refrigerator. And when I came back after everything had settled down, there was my bed was just full of pork chop bone.
And Pepsi soda bottles.
So we had gotten a false alarm a year before, and spent a lot of time. I spent days in conversations with Ramona Africa and a few of the other MOVE members that wouldn't come out of the house, trying to get them to explain to me in layman's terms what the gripe was. That went on for years, and I never put my hand on what the gripe was well enough to explain to other people what the gripe was. But we spent a lot of time there. I spent days off on the block. I knew most of the people who lived on that block personally, it became. And so when May 13th rolled around, I was familiar with everything that was out there on Osage Street.
Can I jump in here real quick, Steve? I just wanted to add to what Harvey's saying, that you know, the process that Harvey just talked about, getting to know the people, covering a story on a long-term basis, getting to know not only people who live there, but police officers. Almost everybody up here had some cop friend someplace who we cultivated as sources. And, you know, you cultivate sources not by picking up the phone and saying, will you be a source? You know, you cultivate trust, you work over a long period of time, and that really paid off that day. It was Harvey's source, actually, who told us what the exact timeline was going to be. He told him the day before, this is when it's going to happen, because that police officer was privy to what was going on. And as the story unfolded, a woman who's not here today, Karen Fox, who was our in-house reporter, she also got firsthand information from somebody who was actually in the command center. So it was, you know, what really made that work for us was firsthand, real information from real sources that were cultivated over a period of time.
But we couldn't have foreseen what happened ultimately that day. What was it we expected was going to happen beginning at 5 or 6 in the morning?
When we went out there we were told on Friday from Archer and other people in charge that we're putting some you know, all on standby for this weekend. We have a feeling, or we heard that they're going to go in and try to talk move out. 12 o'clock, Mother's Day, we get the phone call, we need you out of Osage Avenue. 2 o'clock, we were in place. What I expected going into the house that night at 8:30 was that I'm going to be here. They're going to get on a bullhorn. They're going to talk the MOVE members out. I'm going to have a great video of these people coming out the house, hands up, walking down the street, all over and done with. But what I got was all night long of the bullhorn going with the MOVE members, allegedly, when you talking, you know, police department, while you're out here messing with us, someone's home messing with your old lady or their kids or whatever. And then everything sort of changed at 10:06 in the morning when the gunfire started. You know, and that's when I knew this is real. And I was already in place. I couldn't go anywhere. I already committed myself to being in the house. I was on the phone with Mike Archer, Karen Fox throughout the day, and they kept saying, you're okay, you're okay. I wasn't okay, but I wasn't going to leave out because I was already put myself in a situation. I went through 10,000 rounds of bullets they estimated that day, and still a nightmare. But I mean, one thing I can say that Mike Archer, they kept saying, you're okay, you're okay. And finally, when the fire got out of control, Mike said, get out of there. And I got out.
I don't think that morning anybody expected what was going to happen happened.
Yeah.
And I have to say that in all my years doing this, I had never been put in a position where I was afraid that somebody I put on TV was going to get shot on television. And that happened twice. In the morning, when Harvey and Tom were there, and Charles Thomas was there, and Harvey was on the air, and Steve, you were in the anchor chair, and the bullets started. And being back in the control room, I wasn't exactly sure of where Harvey was standing in relation to where the bullets were flying, but I could certainly hear them, and I could certainly see in his face and in Charles's face that they were nearby.
Well, one personal addition to that. Harvey Clark, to me, has been a very dear friend for a long time. And the way we did live shots at that time was, these were the cameras we talked to in the studio, but this is the monitor where the reporter appeared. So when Harvey was standing there, there was no gunfire at this time, and I was turning and debriefing him from whatever he was reporting on at that moment. And then the gunfire erupted, and Harvey dropped out of the screen. Now, at that moment, you don't know if one of your dear friends has been shot or if he threw himself to the ground. But I knew I had to turn back and take care of you, the viewers. And I didn't know if my pal had been shot. So it was a horrible day in Philadelphia history, but it was also my worst moment ever in broadcasting. And so let's get back to how it changed. You thought, Pete, that the police were going to talk to them, they were going to march out, and it was going to be over, and we had the video, and boom,
That's what I
the
said.
neighborhood's quiet.
Right.
How did it disintegrate? Why did it disintegrate? And Harvey, there's a word you like to use, or that you don't like to use, but you've used to discuss that aspect of it. Premeditated.
I have always felt suspicious of the Philadelphia Police Department. I knew and had friends that were members of elite groups of police officers and the like. But I never trusted Philadelphia Police Department, and I come from originally Chicago, and if I say I don't trust the Philadelphia cop, you'll understand that I have good reason not to have much trust for police officers. But I say this to you personally and seriously. I have always felt and feel today, 31 years later, that there was a premeditated murder on the horizon of people. Not only 11 people who died in the move house, 5 of which were children, but the police went there with 10,000 rounds of ammunition and started firing that at 6 o'clock or whatever it was in the morning, and didn't stop until they ran out of bullets and had to send a police van to the Philadelphia Police Academy to reload another truckload of ammunition to come back and to shoot inside of that house. As time went on, it became clear that as my friend who was right behind me was giving me what he was hearing in his ear, describing a guy who tried to get out of the house, whose hair was on fire, who was shot back into the house. The same description that little Birdie Africa, the only kid that got out of there alive, the same thing that he had described. There was, later it would be found that not one shot was ever fired from inside the house out. Now, when I said to Frank earlier, because we had spent so much time together, it's bothered me my entire life. Not that 11 people died, but in my mind, over 200 people died. Because not only did they destroy 11 lives, they destroyed an entire community. All of their homes, all of their families, all of their belongings, their mental health, all went right down the tube. And we don't think of things like that. Matter of fact, I've had people say to me, well, those people got new houses after the damn neighborhood was burned down. And it takes everything inside of me not to get into it with them. Think, though, that after the worst tragedy in the city's history, when all was said and done, after a move commission ended by saying that a criminal act has taken place and suggested to the U.S. Justice Department that criminal investigation begin. That never happened. The police and fire commissioner retired with their pensions to Florida. The first black mayor, Wilson Good, was reelected and then given a job in Washington, D.C. so that he could retire with the U.S. Educational Department or whatever. And those people who were burned out, that fire started, it was this big, and they stood and watched as an entire black middle-class community was destroyed. School teachers, veterans, city workers, you know, it was the heart of West Philadelphia that they burned down. And not a damn thing was ever done about that today. And I'll go one step further and say, in my heart, those kind of things set the stage for the assassination of black men in America today by police departments across the country, because nothing ever is done about it. 31 years ago move, this past year, as I look at the news, police are shooting people down. They never go to jail. There's nothing, we say, oh, we're going to learn from this. It'll never happen again. But then turn on the television tomorrow and we have another example. That's my personal observation.
You know, like Harvey said, that after the fire burning down, we got to know those families. You know, I remember going there with Lori Lischensky, some of the other reporters. People across the country were sending in the record collections. You remember the gentleman that had the jazz?
Watkins.
Yeah, the Watkins. And so you got to know these people. And when you saw it, you cried because you knew that they lost everything they had. And when that bomb dropped, I was down raiding the refrigerator at the lady's house. All right? I'm going to admit to that. The house shook. I remember calling the station. It was like Mike Archer, Karen Fox. I said, what happened? They said they just dropped something out of the helicopter. We need you back on TV again. Back then, we didn't have cell phones. We had the...
Two-way.
No, we had regular phones in the house. They had cut the electric off in the house I was in. All the power was gone. But you know that you could still use a phone back then without power and electricity. I got back on the phone. Larry came, said, get back on me. We want you back on TV. I look out the window. I see flames coming out of the move house, the bunker burning. Then all of a sudden, the fire is starting to spread from either homes, from the home on the right and the left. And Larry said, you mean it's more than just a move house? Yeah, it started spreading. At that time, I was a volunteer at the American Red Cross. I have been to many fires. I've watched a fire stop from one house to house. Within a half hour, that whole side of the block was gone up in flames. It was more than a half hour before I saw a water hose hit that bunker or that move house. Now it started bothering me because I wanted to fire out. I knew the people were in there. I heard the cops at one point say, they're coming out the back, they're coming out the back. I heard rapid gunfire. That really bothered me. By the time I left the house 3 hours later, all the homes on the right side of the street where the move house were all engulfed in flames. I had no idea that the homes on Pine Street was burning because I couldn't see Pine Street. But when I got out, when I snuck out that alley, Archer said, get out now, get out now. When I came out that house and ran down that alley, hit Pine Street and saw the whole block was gone. And the next day I go back, the south side of Osage is gone. When I left that night, the south side of Osage wasn't burning. So now I see, you know, you had 61 homes burned, then found out that Ramon and Bertie got out the house, but where are the other 11 people?
When I spoke to you that night, that was the second time I thought somebody that worked with me was going to get shot. What I was afraid of was Pete was in that house, the place was burning. Based on what the cops did earlier in the day, I thought, if they see an African-American man coming out of a house he's not supposed to be in, they're going to shoot him.
And that's what I thought, running down the alley. I was running out that alley.
You
That's
got to get
what I
out.
thought about.
Mike?
You got to get out now.
And Pete, I'm sure Pete knows, we knew that the cops were trying to figure out
Yeah.
which house Pete was in.
They kept calling
And they
the
were
station.
trying to go in
They called the
and figure it
station
out.
several times that day as a
Get 'em
picture
out.
cameraman. I said, F them, and just did my job.
I'd like to take a minute and do a little bit of background, go back a little bit, and first of all say to this wonderful organization, thank you for finally allowing a tear to run down
yeah.
our respective faces. We got to know everybody on that block. Harvey and I and Pete and a few others were probably in damn near every house on that street.
Yeah.
And just so you know, the first thing that the cops did that morning was evacuate. I guess that was done on Sunday. I was not there on Sunday.
It was on Sunday, right.
And all of those houses had been evacuated. And the story really didn't end, if at all, for years until after the rebuilding, which is perhaps another luncheon or maybe even a midnight snack. But Pete's work, hiding out, was clearly yeoman work. And the other thing I want to say is all of what we did journalistically, I feel, was based on relationship. and the relationship that Harvey had, and perhaps I had a little bit of it, and Pete and some of our colleagues. We were in every house. We got to know the wonderful people, and by way of characterizing that street, that was not a through street. Osage Avenue at the 6200 block of Osage began at 62nd Street and ended at 63rd Street. So unless somebody had business on that wonderful street with wonderful families, some of the guys are retired. Certainly Mr. Watson was proud of his record collection, which was an unretrievable glob.
And some guy from Florida or Atlanta called the station and found out Mr. Watkins, the guy that lost all of his music, and said, I'm some big guy in the record industry, and if he'll send me a list of all of his music, I will get it replaced. So that's some feedback from the rest of the world watching.
If you put in historical context the times, it makes it even more astonishing that this would happen. You have to remember that less than a year and a half earlier, the city elected its first African-American mayor, Wilson Goode. And I was talking earlier with Bill. I can remember election night, him up on the stage at his election night headquarters, jumping up in the air and waving his arms and talking about what a great future the city was going to have. And this was just 4 years after 8 years of Frank Rizzo, a considerable cultural shift in the leadership of the city. And here we had, less than a year and a half later, an African-American mayor, an African-American managing director who was supposed to take care of this problem and made some of the worst decisions, frankly, in the history of American city government. And I still believe to this day that this story didn't get nearly enough of the national and international attention it certainly would have gotten if it happened today in our world of social media. But if you put that in context, and then as we learned after the incident, and certainly through the MOVE hearings, the series of bad, irresponsible decisions that were made starting years before, when no one would attack this problem. No one would deal with these folks. Again, historical context. They had the same thing happen in 1978 when a police officer was killed.
Also Ramp, James Ramp.
And again, it was allowed to fester and fester, and terrible problems don't go away unless you have a solution.
Well, and I just want to emphasize something that's already been mentioned. Wilson Goode was then re-elected as a mayor who authorized the bombing of his own city. And then let's emphasize the fact that you mentioned, Pete, those houses were allowed to burn. Why was water not put on those houses?
There was fire equipment ready, willing, and it had been on the building. But also, let's not forget that it was very tough to live on that block for the neighbors. The MOVE people had changed the dynamic of the nice block, and they had repeatedly pleaded with city officials to do something.
But Frank, on the same note, when the gunshots started, those same people on that block called City Hall and said, stop the madness right now. This is not the way we envisioned MOVE being removed.
They were wonderful people.
Osage Street.
Wonderful people.
You know, and let me add this. Wilson Goode, in my opinion, was a kind of a odd fellow. And, you know, he sat in his office watching Channel 10 on TV. And the decision-making was based upon whatever we were saying out there. He's watching Channel 10, and all he knows about 62nd and Osage, what's going on that day, he's watching on TV and calling decisions. Wilson Goode, the mayor, never set foot out there until days after. And let me say one other thing. After the whole community was burned to the ground, the crime scene was destroyed before there could be an investigation. I don't know whether it's the mayor or someone ordered a big crane and a bucket to come out there and dig all that stuff up before investigators ever got out there to look through the rubble and see what had happened. It was destroyed. The same thing happened in 1978 when as soon as the shooting stopped, bulldozer comes in, levels the place before anybody can get in and take a look and see what really happened here. I got my doubts where the move, and some of which are spending the rest of their lives in jail, and I'm not a sympathizer, believe me, because you created a situation where you got yourself killed. But I'm not convinced that move killed Jimmy Rand in 1978. The way when guns start going off, bullets find someplace to go. And they don't, they go everywhere. Can you imagine 10,000 rounds have to stop somewhere? Across the street, down the block, 2 blocks away, 3. They closed all the schools in the neighborhood. Because once you fire a bullet out here, that thing can travel for a mile, but it's going to go somewhere and it's going to stop somewhere.
Didn't everybody find it amazing when Wilson Good said, I really didn't know what was going on because my television was blurry? You know, we as the news media, we kind of went, okay. To this day, that bothers me, that we didn't take him to task about that. You know, that excuse was so lame that I found it unimaginable. And to this day, nobody says anything to Wilson Good about it.
And not only Wilson Good, I mean, I remember a big discussion at the Move Commission about who had the responsibility for saying, let the fire burn. And the fire commissioner said, oh, not me.
It's a police situation,
I went to, it's a police situation. When we went to the convention in Detroit, and they said, well, what would you do in a situation like this? They said, well, the police commissioner's in charge. The fire commissioner is under his supervision. So the fire commissioner said, oh, I didn't have anything to do with it. The mayor said, I'll take responsibility. But he had no idea what was going on. And so you got, in my opinion, again, a maniac who likes shooting, that is in charge of everything. And the fire commissioner sits back. The police commissioner then says, let the fire burn. And it burns down 3 city blocks.
And the police commissioner at that time
Sanborn, Greg Sanborn.
had almost no street experience, and he, the previous years of his assignment, had been to be the head of the police academy.
Let me say one other thing, talking about behind the scenes. Out of my 20 years or whatever it wound up being before I got fired, by the way, in the whole time, I always thought of journalists as working journalists. People who were in communities, in the streets, living what the hell was going on in the world and trying to tell other people what that was all about or show other people what that was all about. I don't consider management people journalists. I consider them managers of journalists. But I have to say this. The one person in the newsroom or 2 people in the newsroom that I truly trusted, and I believe that they trusted me, and that's part of the reason I got the freedom to do what I did there, was Mike Archer and Tom Krantz. I didn't talk to anybody at a point where there was a decision to make, even to remove me from the scene and have me go report on the neighborhood or something. After all of my background with Move, the news director said, I'm going to send somebody out there to take Harvey's place, and Harvey can go do neighborhood stories or something. From that point on, I didn't have any conversation with anybody in that newsroom other than Mike and Tom. When I called the station, I said, I want to talk to Mike. If Mike wasn't there, they said, here's Tom. It was the only communication that I had, simply because he was the only people in the newsroom that I thought that understood what we were involved in and made good judgment based on information they were getting from us journalists out there doing what we did. I don't consider managers who sit in a room with 5 or 6 television monitors in front of them their entire lives, or reading the newspaper and getting the stories out in the newspapers. I'm not ready to call them journalists, but the two that I really trusted and would trust again today was Mike Archer and Tom Crank.
I appreciate that, but we're not in the business anymore, pal, so
No, that's it.
careful who you
I
trust.
said I got fired.
Me too.
And just to reaffirm that, Mike, and I'm going to ask you to explain why this is so. The producer in the booth when we went on the air at 6 a.m. was a fellow named Rob Feldman, and Rob said to me last night, if anybody on the inside was the unsung hero, it was Archer. Cool, calm, collected. How in the hell did you do that? I mean, if chaos ever fit a situation, this was it.
Well, I felt the importance, obviously I had great trust and confidence in the people who were in the field. I knew Frank had been out there all year, the previous year with Harvey, and Tom was there. So I had a great deal of confidence in the people who were out there. Charles Thomas, Dennis Waltering, Chuck Satteritz, I'm sure I'm leaving people out. So I had a lot of, and Pete, and I had a lot of confidence in the people who were out there. As I said earlier, nobody expected what was going to happen. And as that escalated, I really felt confident that we were in the right position. We had the right people there. I was extremely confident that I could rely on Harvey and Tom to tell me what was happening on the ground, if it was dangerous, do we need to move, where do we need to go next? So that gave me a lot of confidence. And normally, as an executive producer, you're not in the ear of the anchor or the person in the field in a normal newscast. But in this case, I felt, because of the magnitude of the situation, that I needed to be in direct communication with you and Harvey and Tom and the people in the field.
Well, all right, one more flattering thing for management, and that's it. All right? What he just said about being in our ear, it's one thing to do a scripted broadcast. Obviously, nothing here could be scripted, and we were on the air hour after hour after hour with no possibility of script, and how are you going to get information and sit there and talk? Well, coming into your ear while you're on the air can be very disruptive, or it can be, as you did it, Mike. I don't know if I ever told you. I've never experienced somebody who was so concise and calm and clear, and it was almost when I would draw a natural breath, you'd feed one tidbit of information, and we'd handle that tidbit, and then you'd feed another tidbit. It was magnificent that day. Now, nothing more nice about management.
Can I jump in with an anecdote about that? Mike related to me that during that first part of the morning, when he first feared that Harvey might actually get shot on TV, he didn't get into Steve's ear and say, "Steve, I think Harvey might get shot now." What he basically said was, he got into it, this is what you told me and this is what I wrote, you got into Steve's ear and said, whatever happens, just report what's happening. Just report the facts, just play it straight. And that was kind of his way of saying, damn, And everything you just said about Mike is right on. He was calm, not only in your ear, but when he talked to us, and that's all about being a professional, everything. And I wanted to jump in with one other thing that reminded me of, Harvey talked about none of us basically interfering with him doing his thing. Very early in the morning, the very first cut-in that we did was at 6 o'clock, or 5 of 6, just before 0 hour. And Jay Newman, our news director at the time, he did everything right that day except one thing. And the one thing he did wrong that morning was he called me on the phone and he said, "I want Dennis Waltering to do the 6 o'clock cut-in." And I said, but Harvey's the man. And this was not anything against either guy. This was because Dennis had come to us with anchoring experience. I guess Jay figured, he could, and Jay was not, he had not been with us all that long at that point. And so Harvey didn't care. To Harvey's credit, he said, okay, whatever. Sorry. So Dennis did it. And then all the people in the newsroom basically told Jay that he was crazy. And then from that point on, Harvey was the live guy for the rest of the morning. Dennis went about his business. Jay Newman, who's not here, I think he's general manager at a TV station in Baltimore still, might be at WBAL. Jay made all the right decisions that day. It was a fairly courageous decision to take a CBS O&O, blow out all the commercials pretty much for all day except for 1 hour in the morning, and that was the hour when The Price is Right is on, because that's the cash cow, of course, and then a couple hours in the afternoon. Jay said, we got to stay with this because this is bigger than making money and then running commercials. So just a good word for Jay, even though he's not here.
The one thing that's super important in TV is to get pictures. And what no one knows is there was a guy, it was Chuck Satteritz, who got this shot. If he did not have the sense to get those horns up that day, all we're talking about wouldn't have happened. But this one guy, he's out there. I think it might have been another guy, Bob.
We're all out. It was 4 of us out there that Sunday. We had what he's talking about, if you all seen the shot of the bomb being dropped, Jim Barger, who was our manager years later, who got that shot. That Sunday we were sent out there. We have all seen the bunker up on the roof. We had spent weeks or years out there. So we had no way of being able to see what was going on in that bunker. So if you ever see our live trucks, they have an antenna that goes 60 feet in the air. We had a loaner Sony camera, like a $10,000 camera. Our cameras were like $50,000, $60,000.
So
it was $5,000.
Yeah.
$5,000 loaner camera. Figured, well, if it falls off that mast, it's only $5 grand. So we tie wrapped it, taped it to the top of the antenna, put the antenna up, ran the cable down into the truck so you can see it on the monitor. Then we used an antenna to pan the top of that roof. And that's how Barger was able to get the shot of the cops commandeered the vehicle, or the light. I was hiding in a house, but I was hiding in a house that, when it happened. But that's how we did it. We put a tape on that, we taped the camera to the antenna. Now, ironically, years later, all these companies that made our live trucks, they had cameras on the mast. So if we had known that, we could have copyrighted it. We'd be millionaires right now. But we didn't know it.
I want to give some credit to other people, too, because Pete kind of brings this up. When we were all out there, we were talking to each other. When Nick came, Frank and I had been out there for months trying to find a high point in West Philadelphia where we could see the top of the Moose house. We had come to a kind of an agreement with the father at the Catholic Church.
Father Diamond.
Father Diamond,
Father
right?
Diamond
Yep.
at the Catholic Church, because their bell tower, we thought we could get up in there, and actually went up there and looked and said, this will do. We can see the top of that building, because everything else in West Philadelphia is 2 stories high. At the last minute, for political reasons or whatever, Father Diamond said, Archdiocese says we ain't getting involved with this mess. So we were denied that. Standing by that truck, when Chuck Satteritz said, let's put this camera up on the mast, it went up. We were looking at the monitors, and voila, here's the picture.
Yeah.
What that did, though, was gave the police, who had no vantage point to see the top of that building. They walk by the truck, and all of a sudden they look at the monitors, and they see the top of the building on our cameras. And they said to their captain out there, hey, these guys somehow are getting pictures from up there. So when they tried to move the camera guys and all off that corner, then Tony Gore, who was the engineer guy in the truck,
Rest his soul.
said, I have to shut the truck down then,
Yeah.
because it can't run without
He had to
somebody
change the
being there.
battery, I think, for the camera.
Yeah, so he made a deal with them. We made a deal with them. They say, well, the engineer can stay, the rest of you guys got to go. Because he would be there to change the battery, and he had threatened to shut the truck down. He said, I can't leave this truck here by itself. I'm going to shut it down. And they said, oh, no, don't do that. Because they had now a vantage point of that they would never have seen without a couple of guys making that decision to put that little camera up there.
That vantage point that Harvey's talking about was focused on something called the bunker that they had built
It was a shed on top of a roof.
onto the roof of their house, which was the target of the bombing.
And bad decisions must be contagious because the state police were involved, the United States Army was involved,
ATF.
ATF was involved. I believe Secret Service might have had a foot into it, all of which legally cannot get involved with a domestic scrap between citizens and the police department. They were the ones, the C-4 came from the Army, the helicopter came from the state. You just go down the list who participated in dropping that bomb on that house. Now, the bomb wasn't a big deal, actually. But when they knew from their earlier experience that the first thing that the authorities would do is cut off the water and the electric and everything else. So they had a generator that they put on the roof
Gasoline.
and half dozen gasoline cans up there to keep that thing running. And so the explosion set off the gas cans, which you and I could put that fire out. But then it was allowed to progress, after that. So it was a huge thing. And just one thing about the MOVE Commission, that was one of the most creditable. They had distinguished people on that MOVE Commission, people who were involved in the Watergate hearings, the whole bit. And their recommendation was that criminal behavior took place here, and the U.S. Justice Department needs to look into that, and that was the end of that story. So.
It just goes, the issue of our camera on the mast really tells you something about the police planning for this operation. They didn't figure out in advance, how can we have a vantage point so we can see the top of that house and that bunker that they were all so concerned about. They hadn't even thought about, well, how are we going to see it until they walked by our truck. This shows you how ill-prepared they were to take any kind of a responsible action at that house.
And today, go to a small suburban police department that has some type of emergency response vehicle, and you'll see a mast with guess what's on top of it.
Yeah.
That reminds me of what comes around every year when May 13th happens, which is the question I always ask myself is, could this happen today? Could this happen in Philly or any place today? And I have a little bit of knowledge about how police SWAT teams train because I'm a councilman in my town and I'm kind of involved in that. Just looking back at what the Philadelphia police did back 31 years ago, and I'm a police supporter, my son's a cop, and I think that cops deserve a lot more credit than they get these days for various reasons, but the incompetence that happened in Philadelphia in 1985 was it was epic. The police officers reported that they were under machine gun fire all day. It was their own machine gun was firing at them. MOVE never had a machine gun. The whole idea of using C4 to blow holes through the walls on either side of the MOVE house was a dismal failure. The whole idea of dropping a bomb on, first of all, going up in a helicopter to drop anything on a house, that's risky in itself. But to drop an explosive on a rooftop with prop wash and all the stuff that could take that bomb anywhere, it was just it was kind of frickin' frack, it was Keystone Cops. When I see the kind of training SWAT teams get today, 30-some years later, I would really like to think that that could not happen again that way. Because those police officers, they're trained to do things like de-escalate, wait people out. They only go in if they believe there's an imminent threat. The whole idea of warning the whole world and then evacuating the street so you can go in and blow the shit out of it, I can't imagine that happening today. I mean, I would never say never, because it's always humans who make those decisions. It's not the gear. But, I really would like to think that could not be repeated today.
Well, I'm not as optimistic as you are.
I understand that.
That couldn't happen today. That 50 caliber machine gun across from MOVE was borrowed from some gun collector.
Is that right?
Yeah, on the main line. The police department didn't have a 50 caliber machine gun. There was a guy out on the main line that they got the gun from, said, we'll need it for 24 hours. And so then they set it up right across the street.
And that would imply that the guys who shot it were never trained on it and probably
Probably not.
didn't know it.
If you listen to the commission, when that thing opened up, it actually penetrated the walls of the building, and they had 2 teams, one on each side of there, and when they said that they thought they were under gunfire, it was that 50 caliber
Right.
over there,
Yeah.
pumping away, and they really did. believe
And
that
can
they
you
were-
imagine not having communications? They couldn't talk to those guys to say, please stop shooting at us?
And I say one other thing, because there's race all over this thing. But I was on North Roosevelt Boulevard at a car wash. Ran the car through, and I was waiting for the car to come through on the other side, and this gentleman walked up to me and said, "You're Harvey Clark." I said, "Yep." He said, "My name is," what was Bergheier's first name?
Who was it?
John Bergheir,
Oh, the cop?
the cop. Officer Bergheir. And he said, "I'm Bergheir." And I knew exactly who he was. He was the guy that broke the ranks after the order was given. No one comes out of that house. He was the one that said, "I can't do this." When he saw that kid come out the back of the
Saw
house,
Birdie come out.
he broke the ranks, ran down the alley, grabs the kid,
And Ramona.
and rescues him to some degree. Ramona Africa is about this tall. I think the only reason she got out was because they thought she was a kid too. So it looked like 2 kids came out, and once Bergheir ran down the alley, a hero in my opinion,
They were in like 3 feet of water.
3 feet of water, grabs his kid and takes him out of harm's way. When Bergheir went back to his regular duties, he found black dolls, nigger lover, all kinds of things in his locker. They called the guy on the phone 24/7 and gave him all kinds of, on the telephone lines. The guy started drinking. He lost his wife. He lost his family. He lost everything, wound up in a rehab center, and was bragging about recovery, that he had just recovered when I ran into him at the car wash. But he too lost everything, and all of that. Race had an underlying tone of what happened there. I cannot believe that if MOVE set up shop anywhere in something other than a black community, that would have ever happened. It just would not happen then, and Tom, it would not happen today. That would not happen. So I can't keep race out of it. I can't keep race out of it at all. And when I say, look at how irresponsible police are today in shooting people who have been stopped for a traffic violation. I want to share something with you that I decided that I wasn't going to, told my wife, bring up. In June of 1951, my family, Harvey Clark Jr., my father, Johnetta, his wife, his son, Harvey III, and his daughter, Michelle Clark, a decorated CBS correspondent, made the mistake of moving into a community called Cicero, Illinois, right outside of Chicago. The next day, 4,000 people showed up and burned us out of our house. All the furniture went out the picture window in front of the place, started a bonfire. The police did nothing but stand there and watch. We had to be escorted out and were told by the police, if you come back, you're dead. To the extent that Adlai Stevenson, who was the governor at the time, called out the National Guard because the local police would do nothing about it. And the National Guard set up troops and blocked off Cicero, Illinois. There was a young guy that was an attorney for the NAACP at the time who represented our family. His name was Thurgood Marshall. And his his companion in our defense was George Layton, who became a federal judge in the Midwest Sundown place. And I said to Larry Kane, I think I said it to him on air, this reminds me of something. I know what it's like to get burned out, to lose. I was 6 years old. My sister was 8. And my folks, I think my dad was 26 or something like that. And my mother was 18 or whatever it was. But they were young. And nobody, the only person that was charged and arrested, believe it or not, guess who? Thurgood Marshall was arrested for inciting a riot. And then when they realized what they'd done, of course, the next day or so they released him. But I know how mobs and hatred and racism all get into the same place at the wrong time and how things happen. We never were compensated. We slept on, my dad had a guy he went to college with. My family lived on his porch for a month until we could get a start. So I know what people feel like when you burn their houses down, their memories go up in smoke, their children have no place to go, and all we concentrate on is 11 people who burned up in that house. There were 61 homes destroyed, 200 to 250 people left homeless. They were murdered too, in my opinion. Because today, I am 71 years old, and I'm still pissed off about 1951. So I cannot imagine those people out there not still being pissed off about 1985.
You know, one thing that Harvey talks about and that made me just think is that 3 o'clock that morning when I was in the house after I went at 8:30 that night, all I could hear on the bullhorn was Ramona saying to the police out there that, you know, we want to talk to Harvey Clark, Vernon Odom, I think it was Trudy, and Barbara Grant. They wanted to talk to some black people that were in the media. They were willing to come out if they could talk to people who would listen to them. This went on deaf ears. It seemed like they didn't want them to come out because then, like 78 already happened, Officer Ramp was killed. So the thing is, it seemed like it's like, let's just end this, get it over and done with. You know, because if they had brought the reporters out to come on Osage and talk to Ramona, the MOVE members, they're gonna voice what they wanted, you know, their demands were, and they didn't want it to get to that point. And that's why 3 hours later, the shooting started. And it went on all day long. I can still feel the bullets whizzing by my head in that house. You know, I can still smell the smoke and the tear gas. We forgot to mention tear gas that they fired half the day when they weren't going into the homes on either side with the explosives. I could hear them trying to blow holes into the basement of the MOVE house. When that didn't work, that's when the chopper came. So a lot of things that, other than trying to negotiate with them that day, it's just a nightmare for all of us.
And I think you have to be reminded, as crazy as MOVE was, they were not wanted for murder or doing any crazy, serious stuff. They were wanted for parole violations or disturbing the peace or whatever they were charging them with to get them out.
Or child neglect.
Child neglect, because the children were in there. But at any rate, that's enough for me.
Yeah.
Well, after that kind of emotional stuff, I think you have an idea what it was about. I know that we were singled out because Channel 10 got awards for the bomb dropping footage and that kind of stuff, but this is the real reason for the awards. The people on the street who lived through it. I hope you've gotten a feeling for how horrible that was, and as Pete said, why the nightmare continues. And let's pray that it never happens again. Jerry, do you have time? Should we do questions and answers? What do you want to do?
And the two gentlemen beside you are soul brother number one and soul brother number two.
We didn't break any law. That's the reason we didn't go to jail.
Yeah.
We didn't.
I happen to be, they use the word honorary deputy police commissioner in Philadelphia. And I do the work and finance a lot of what you can have.
Keep it.
An honorary fire commission. And I came in under the reign of Sylvester Johnson, who was grossly underestimated and abused in the daily news. I was in the middle of getting things straight, and no sense going over that at this time. The brand new fire commissioner is a graduate of Central High School and a brilliant guy and greatly loved within the police department.
10 seconds, Cal.
That's it. As you said, final sentence.
Are you trying to get another question?
This would
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
not be replicated and could not happen again, we hope.
Okay, Dick Kearney.
Let me say one other thing. When I went to
For
work for the mayor,
5,000 years of Channel 10.
Ed
I was in the
Rendell.
studio with John Facenda.
Hold on
when
just
they
one
bombed
sec.
in the
One
fire.
sec.
Hang on, Dick.
One sec.
And we covered the whole
When I
thing.
went to work for Ed Rendell, after my journalism experiences, I set up, one of the first things that I did was set up a secret meeting that we had with Rendell and Ramona Africa. Ramona came to City Hall, the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the mayor, there must have been 12, 14 people there. The idea being that with a new administration, there should be some kind of talk and relationship between the survivors rather than just have move, repeat itself in another 3 or 4 years. And it clearly worked for a while. There was some communication between the mayor's office, the managing director's office, and Ramona. And I think that if there had been some dialogue, that it may have prevented what happened on the 13th. But just want to say that we did set up a meeting with Ramona Africa and Ed Rendell and his crew, and they did have some communication. When Ramona called the mayor's office, she got through. So, I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to say that I was in the studio with John Facenda covering the whole affair live, and I think you two should be an accommodation for that. Especially Pete. Pete almost got himself killed getting through the police lines, going into the house right across the street from the bombing and the fire. And Pete, I'm surprised you didn't get hurt. I really am. And I think you both should have an accommodation for that. One other thing, the guy giving the orders was Wilson Good. I guess you all knew that.
Right, he was the
Because
mayor.
Pete, you had a shot of him giving the orders, and John Facenda came out and said, looks like Mayor Good is giving the orders. Okay?
Okay. Pete got enough accommodation.
Enough free meals.
And pork chops.
Yeah, enough pork chops and free lunches, yeah.
Good thing I wasn't in there, Pete. I couldn't have eaten the pork chops.
You know, the thing is, Frank was my mentor when I first started on the street, so I learned a lot from him. We've been through a lot together.
Well, then let's talk about what you wanted to talk about for a minute. Frank was telling us a story earlier that I didn't know about when it ended and he was on his way home and the experience with some of the kids there.
I think we've all talked about a lot of things that happened during the event, and Harvey and I spent so much time with the kids. The kids were beautiful, beautiful children. And as it happened, my 2 little ones were about the same age at home. And someone mentioned DHS, Department of Health Services, or the kids, whatever. Those kids were taken across to the park every day, and quite frankly, I have never figured out, and it will always remain a mystery to me, why the city didn't pick up the kids for some reason at the park a day or 2 or the day before.
They were supposed to do it that Saturday. That Saturday, they were
And they
supposed to
did
grab
not.
the kids.
And they did not. And those kids were just beautiful children.
Yeah.
They were interesting. They had little affect when we saw them, but we sat with them many, many times, Harvey and I, and in many of those houses with many of those families. But what I really want to do is share with you my ending of that day. And after everything sort of quieted down, I put my camera in my news car, and I took a walk around the 3 blocks. And I was looking at London after the Blitz, a fire here, a fire there, a chimney standing, half a wall standing. I was overwhelmed by what I saw and drove home. I live in Bucks County, and I was getting off of I-95 at Street Road, and lights and sirens came on from behind me. And I said, wow, I'm exhausted. I don't know what I did, but I must have done something. I pulled over. And because I took the news car home, all the cops in town knew me a little bit, and the car lived at my house. And a cop pulled me over, walked up to the car and said, were you at Move? And at that point, we sat on the bridge over 95 for an hour and a half, and he gave me the greatest gift I think I've ever had with regard to the news, that I've seen very much harm and hurt, and some good things as well. But he sat with me and we debriefed for an hour and a half with his lights going around on the bridge over 95 with Street Road, and I was able to go home and get some sleep. And that's my personal story. And I'm sure my colleagues all have similar experiences. Thank you.
You know, one of the things I experienced after Move was that because I was on TV with Harvey and Steve and Larry most of the day, from May 13th to July 29th, I was living in North Philadelphia. I had a news car, unmarked news car. A lot of the cops knew who I was. I was pulled over 3 times in those 3 months. It was harassment because they knew where I was. I witnessed all this stuff unfold. I would have to testify at the grand jury, which I did a year later. I got pulled over for going through a stop sign 3 times that I stopped at, 3 different locations. And one time I pulled up, the cop followed me with 2 blocks, lights and sirens, so I pulled in front of my house, told my wife to go in the house. My son Chris was only 3 weeks old when Move happened. He was born April he was 2 weeks old. He was born April 24th, and this happened May 13th. I told my wife and the kids to go in the house. The cop asked for my registration. I gave him all my information. He never gave me a ticket. It was just harassment. So July 29th, I moved out of the city and moved to Cheltenham. I would not come into the city, even though my whole family lived there for a couple of years. It was fear. As time went on, I got past that. Move happened in '83. I was going to the police department in 1980. Move happened in '85. I was going to join the police department 2 years earlier. But the station promised to give me a job as a cameraman. I was working in the mailroom. I was going to school for photography. They knew where my aspiration was to save the city I grew up in. So 2 years after I would have been in that department, I may have been out there May 1985 as a police officer. I'm glad I made the decision I made, because when I became a cameraman, my thing was to let people see things the way I see it through my eyes. I don't regret what I did. To this day, I've been in a half dozen shootouts since Move, because I always wanted to be there when things happen. I've gotten a little older now, so it's now slowed down a little bit getting there. But there are 2 people here that I like to thank, outside of people up here and someone out there, is LaWanda Scales, who hired me. She saw this 18-year-old kid that, she believed in me. And LaWanda's over there. And the other person is Nancy Block, who was on the assignment desk that day. Nancy was the assignment editor.
Yeah.
The thing is, what made it happen for me, and with Frank being a mentor and Harvey I work with, we've done a lot of stories together, is that the stories I did every day and the stories I still do, I live those stories. I've lost 5 members on the streets of Philly in the last 5 years, young black males. So these people I sit down with whose kids been shot, families been shot and killed, I've been there. When crack came out, went undercover in 08, up on, 8th and Butler. Frank and I went undercover, 8th and Butler. When crack first came out, we nearly lost our lives out there that night getting people buying crack cocaine. We went out there dressed up as painters. Frank decides to drive the neighborhood in this beat up truck we had. The guy comes up to my window, I'm driving. He wants to sell me crack cocaine. So I said, look, man, I can't. I got my boss right here with me. So we videotaped that. We got a national award.
And I had a towel over the camera on my lap.
We were rolling. So
while Pete was offered the coke.
and we take credit for Move, but we have coworkers here from Channel 3, Channel 629.
Absolutely.
When we're on the street, we're friends out there.
This is a wonderful
But we have
city
to save each other. You know, there's been times that we've covered each other out on the street. So I really appreciate you all being here today. I could go on like Harvey. I learned from Harvey to just keep talking. So, so I'm going to back down. I'd like to thank everybody, especially my coworkers here, former coworkers here, that you guys have made my life interesting. I'm just a kid from North Philadelphia that came to a station and you guys made me feel at home. And I appreciate every bit of it.
And
all right.
Pete's being very humble. He has had a lot of challenges from his family with losses and prison and other things that I hope I'm not embarrassing him too much about.
It's the truth. Yeah.
Well, Pete, we're glad you didn't become a cop.
Now, most of my friends are cops now, so.
But if you want to work in Bucks County, I can.
Jerry, what do you want to do?
Okay.
How you doing? I'll try to keep it short. I remember this only too well like it was yesterday. I want to thank all of you for sharing your experiences with us. It's great to see you all here at one time. You mentioned before the mayor never even showed up on site or at the command post. Unless I'm wrong, his managing director, I think, was James White, who wasn't in the area either. So you really didn't have too many people in charge of the scene. And later on, it seemed that the fire commissioner and the police commissioner kind of at odds, not working together until they made a decision on what to do. One last thing, I also remember on Homer's show, a gentleman had approached the city. He wanted to get a wrecking ball from the other street and knock it down for a cost of $3,000. The mayor's response was, well, the city just doesn't have $3,000 to spend like that. Instead, they spent tens of millions of dollars. So looking back, it doesn't look like a good time for Philadelphia. I'm happy we're so much better.
I'm a Temple University student, and I just wanted to ask ask you to reflect on how the coverage of breaking news has changed, especially in the wake of Orlando. I guess how it's changed from the horrible events surrounding Move to where it's at now.
Well, the capability now, it's much easier to get live signals from various places. It's also the amount of video and audio that's now available is 100-fold from what it used to be, because everyone in this room is walking around with a camera. So the supply of video and audio is greatly increased. Technologically, and Pete could speak to this, it's much easier to go live. Equipment is more portable, it's smaller, it's more durable than what we had 30 years ago.
And the battery will last forever. It'll last 3-4 hours compared to what we used to have. A battery lasts 20 minutes. And our phones right now have the same app in it with the live view that I can go live. If a plane crashed right there in that field, and right now I could be on TV in a minute with my iPhone.
The difference is, though, that in the old days, you had to have pictures. Today, you have a person stationed out in front of a object that stands there and talks endlessly.
And talks.
And talks. There's no pictures that people that put their lives on the line to go out and show you what's happening.
They talk about
the best you can do is a cell phone by some citizen that happened to be walking down the street. That's not even a part of the consideration anymore. Television is some talking head, some anchor person that stands there and just talks endlessly. I watch CNN because in Puerto Rico we don't get too much of what's going on back here. But I watch CNN, and from the time it comes on, they get one subject They stay with that one.
Repeat.
And if it takes 2 days or 3 days.
It's still breaking news.
It's honest to goodness, it's just not what it used to be.
You know, as also
And it
as
should be better with all the technology and stuff that Mike is talking about. Should be a hell of a lot better TV than what I see today.
And it's a 24-hour cycle. So
Yeah.
if MOVE was happening today
You'd still
on
be hearing about
CNN, you'd see a little box in the corner, maybe waiting for the fire to spread, and then they'd go live to the fire with somebody standing far enough away, unlike Harvey, who could feel the heat in many ways.
as the technology goes up, though, and as there's more ways to get on TV, the body count at TV stations and newspapers is going down. The place where I used to work in New York, CBS Newspath, they're doing what we did with almost half the number of people. So you have much more stuff and many fewer people. It doesn't pass through as many hands. It doesn't pass through as many editors. You know, if Karen Fox drummed into my head 1,000,000 times, everybody needs an editor. That's rule one. And the way it is right now, a story can go right from a cell phone onto TV for 1,000,000 people with little or no oversight. And that's a serious problem, man.
And right
that
now,
also puts incredible pressure on each individual journalist, like a young guy like you. I mean, the weight of the world is you got to make sure it's really, really right, not just right. It's got to be really, really, really right, because it's going to go right from your lips to, you know, to an audience.
And please don't think that I haven't had arguments with Bill and Harvey, and I know that Pete has had arguments when we're out covering stories about debating what it is and what the point is and how we can do it better. And I don't know if somebody with a phone in their hand is really thinking about the credibility of what they're sending.
And now, for you all in college, you have to be multi-talented. I mean, coming out of college, when I came out, I wanted to be a cameraman. Now you have to be a camera person, the editor, the writer,
the interviewer.
Because right now, when my video goes into that station, there's no 12 editors in a booth cutting it. That writer that is writing that story is editing that video. And then that editor, that person could be outside shooting the next day. You know, our jobs are not just a camera person's job. We have to be multi-talented.
So that's what's changed.
Yep.
And in 1985, I can't even fathom, there was no internet.
Yeah.
Right? We still had typewriters in the newsroom. Right. We still got our news from UPI teletype machines, you know, clackety, clackety, clack.
And we got our first cell phone from Tony Williams.
We borrowed.
Remember?
Right.
The suitcase phone?
You know, the whole idea that our key coverage was done by a guy on a Bell telephone landline.
It was a landline.
And that's only because in those days, those phones were separate. The power was separate.
Right. Yeah,
the power went on, the stupid phone kept working.
Yeah.
And we were told not to use the cell phone too much because I think it was 50 cents or $1 a
The
minute.
cost of cell phones was unbelievable.
They cut my phone off that time.
Right, Mike? You told us not to spend much money on that cell phone.
I never said that.
I remember when the first computers came in the newsroom, and we had typewriters, and when the first computer came in, and we were told, you got 30 days now, and we're going to shift this whole system over to computerized, and your typewriter is going to disappear. Every reporter in that room said, well, I got 30 days. Stay with that typewriter. Right. When that 30 days came, we were all intimidated because none of us knew how to work the computer. And
didn't want to know, I might add.
You know, and didn't want to know. That's right. Did not want to know. Refused to make that little old change. That sounds like 100 years ago.
Yeah. And those cameras were pretty heavy when we started out. I used to be taller than Harvey.
All right, I'm over here now, and everybody thinks it's a Channel 10 thing. Look who snuck in from Channel 3.
Hi, Robin McIntosh. I also worked MOVE, but I wasn't at Osage Avenue, and we were the station that didn't win any awards for I will tell you, in the years since MOVE 85, I will tell you and I'll probably not tell you guys anything, the roots of 85 began in 78, because an officer named James Ramp was killed. Now, you talk to any police officer who's been around for a while, they don't call him Officer James Ramp. His name was Jimmy Ramp.
Jimmy, yeah.
their friend, not just their fellow officer, their friend was killed in 1978. 5 firefighters were shot and wounded in 1978. Before they went out to Osage Avenue on that day, the bottom line for the police department and the fire department was, we're not going to get any of our people shot. That Jimmy Ramp thing sent a shockwave through the Philadelphia Police Department. When they showed up there, you're absolutely right. They didn't care about the people in that house. They just wanted to make sure that their people weren't going to get killed, number one, and number two, this was paybacks for Jimmy Ramp, their friend Jimmy Ramp. So what happened was the commanders told their people, I don't want any, why did they put the fire out? They didn't want to put fire people anywhere near there with a hose that they might get shot. They didn't want to, they were going to put down a withering line of fire on that house to make sure that they had no officers killed. And the only people who were going to get killed that day were the members of MOVE. And that was the bottom line before they showed up, and that was what ended up being the case by the end of it, except for that one officer, obviously, who went in and saved people. You also say this is never going to happen again. It wasn't just the Philadelphia Fire Department and the Philadelphia Police Department that caused this thing. These people went into that neighborhood and created havoc. They built a bunker, not a bunker, it was a storage shed on top. I was there the night before that happened. I was patting those kids on the back, talking to them. I could have gotten them out of there, but we didn't, obviously. First of all, if you had taken them out of there, there would have been a hue and cry about, what are you taking these kids out for? They're perfectly healthy, they're eating natural, and you're kidnapping our children. Then the onus would have been on the city. So they left them in there. You say that it's never going to happen again. It just happened a few years ago with the Salvation Army building falling down, because the licenses and inspections department, not the police department, not the fire department, L&I didn't do their job. L&I didn't do their job in 1985 when these people went up without any building permits, without any permission, and built this bunker on top that they used with a bullhorn to harangue the entire neighborhood at 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, screaming obscenities up and down the block for not weeks, but months, until they finally said, you know, we've got to stop this thing. So there's a whole lot of blame to go around.
To make them stop.
I'm sorry?
Neighbors pleading.
Oh, absolutely.
To
They were living
L&I
this
and city
nightmare.
officials
and of
and
course they
Lucian
lost their
Blackwell.
homes because they complained, but the city should have done something long before that day, long before May, long before 1985, because those people were there, and as you said, you know, they tore that building down in 78 within 3 hours of the thing being over. There went all the evidence, but Jimmy Ramp was killed, and what can I tell you?
I can say this, though.
But
I also know, Robin, that the commanders were ordered not to send anybody out there that had been or participated in 1978. There were at least a dozen snipers back behind that house that were in 1978. So wait a minute. The purpose was to allow the get even mentality and to murder off those people. So I agree with you that MOVE should have been dealt with long before. But let me say, to continue to blame MOVE for what happened that day, they're a part of it, no question about it. But to think today that that couldn't happen again, listen, I wouldn't want to be standing on the corner of 62nd and Osage again. But I wasn't surprised when it happened then. I was surprised that it went on for so long. I was surprised that 10,000 shots were fired. I was surprised that they pumped water on that house for 3 hours before the bomb ever, and then said, well, you know, we're not going to squirt any water on that sucker after she starts burning. Well, I tell you that, you know, I understand. I know that the people there put a lot of pressure on City Hall, too. But you don't kill people for being a nuisance.
I don't think so either, but that's what happened that day.
That's what happened.
And none of us in this room, certainly including us and me, have any idea how much surplus military equipment our various police departments now have to be able to stage a much more aggressive event on a similar situation.
Okay, Liz.
I just want to say that I don't think this should be talked about as history, and I don't know why this isn't on CBS Sunday Morning, 60 Minutes, this panel, and why someone isn't making a documentary about this, because I think this is just as relevant today as it was back then. I think you should be doing something about that.
There was quite a bit done after MOVE, not enough probably on the national level. Well, there's a lot of things that have happened between then and now that require just as much of, attention.
And there's an interesting documentary that was just completed a couple years ago, notwithstanding Tom Crance's book, but there's an interesting documentary that was put together with all actuality footage of leading up to MOVE, of the events, and including the MOVE Commission. And it's available probably on Netflix and Amazon and things like that. But like so many documentaries, it ain't Batman.
The discussion ended with the MOVE Commission. It really did. I mean, it seemed like there was an effort to put this thing to rest. And I can understand part of that because it wasn't just May 1985. It had been festering in Philadelphia since 1978. And it was a discussion for years and years and years. And then finally, like I said, I wasn't shocked at what happened out there. I was shocked that they burned the neighborhood down, but I was not shocked when the bullets started flying. That didn't shock me one bit. But the decision-making after that to drop a bomb and to burn the neighborhood down, that shocked me.
Okay, before we close, I want to thank Bobby Lopez, who helped us out putting all this together. Give him a big round of applause. Without his diligent work, this panel would not exist today. Thank you. That's it, Steve.